More than 7 years on from the Grenfell Tower disaster, which claimed 72 lives, this morning, in under an hour, the final report into what happened is being published. For families and survivors who lost loved ones in the fire over 7 years ago, it's been an agonising wait in their fight for justice. The report will examine how the tower block came to be in a condition that allowed the fire to spread. Meanwhile, thousands of people are still living in homes with flammable cladding and other fire safety defects across the country, including here in the county. Paula Shallow is from the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign group and joins me now. Good morning, Paula.
Good morning.
So tell us first of all about the group and how you got involved.
Well, the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign launched in 2019, and it's made up of various campaign groups from across the country in affected areas. So, there's a Birmingham group, a Leeds group, and so on. And I got involved because my building was identified in 2020 as having serious fire safety defects, and it quickly became clear that nobody was actually taking this problem seriously, and that our safety was at risk, but also we were going to be expected to pay to fix these buildings that we had no hand in developing or building.
And what an awful situation to find yourself in. Can you just describe how that feels? It's
actually quite hard to describe how it feels if you haven't experienced it, to be honest. It's very shocking in the first instance to realise that something you bought in good faith turns out to be, flammable and unsafe. So that's the first shock. And then the second shock is that nobody seems to be taking it seriously, and that all the parties who actually are responsible are trying to wriggle out of their liability. So that was very shocking, sort of the callousness with which we were treated when developers and others just didn't really want to know. And then the government completely, tried to understate the extent of the problem and just hope that developers and others would do the right thing, which of course was never going to happen.
So how important is today with the publishing of this report?
Well, first and foremost, our thoughts today naturally are with the Grenfell families and survivors who desperately need and deserve justice, and it's really been a long time coming. But hopefully the report being published today is an important first step in eventually holding to account those responsible for the loss of 72 innocent lives. So the truth of what happened and why it happened and who was responsible, how it could have been prevented, because those were avoidable deaths, which is quite shocking. And eventually coming out of that, although it will take time, there must be some serious consequences, or else nothing will change, and it will just be a matter of time before we see another Grenfell.
Tell us about the problems owners of properties are still having with cladding.
It's a mix, really, because a certain number of buildings are undergoing remediation, which in itself is an unpleasant experience, but a necessary one, but only a small proportion of the total. There are buildings where people are still struggling to get the funding, battling with developers and freeholders who are still trying to cut corners or, as I say, wriggle out of their responsibilities. And then there are thousands of buildings that haven't even been assessed yet, so they don't know what remediation might be needed.
It is really shocking and heartbreaking to think that, this is people's homes. This is so important.
Exactly.
So important. So what do you hope will happen as a result of this report?
Well, just on that last point, the other day, Angela Rayner visited Dagenham, where, there was a near miss with the building burnt down, but luckily all 100 people escaped with their lives, if nothing else. But she actually said, these are not assets, these are people's homes. Yeah. And people need to feel safe in their own homes. And that's exactly right. So what we hope will happen is that the Labour government will, now that they're in power, step up, grasp the nettle, and, accelerate the pace of remediation, take enforcement action against any parties who are not, accepting their responsibility, forward fund if needed, chase the guilty parties afterwards. Again, Angela Rayner said that she would end the foot dragging. So what we need to see now is that translated into action on the ground.
Okay, so you really want to see that action. Is there anything else that needs to be done as far as you're concerned?
Well, gosh, there are quite a few things, actually.
Yeah.
Maybe leasehold reform needs to happen, because that's a feudal system that has, contributed to, in some ways, to the misery of people caught up in this mess. But basically, there just needs to be, there can never again be the systemic failures of regulation and control of the construction sector. They were allowed to put profits before people. There were horrific consequences. Successive governments deregulated, ignored warnings. And we just need to see that an end to that and put people's safety first.
Absolutely. Paula, thank you so much for coming on and chatting to us about this morning. That's Paula Shallow there from the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign group, joining us here on BBC Radio Suffolk. That report into the Grenfell Tower disaster, which claims 72 lives, it is going to be published in under an hour, the final report into what happened. Of course, we will keep you up to date with that here on BBC Radio Suffolk.